And then all of a sudden something inside of me got mad, and I gripped that steering wheel, and I was coming up on a sharp curve, and I was so out of my mind that I punched the gas on the accelerator, and I was just going to run into the woods. I was just going to drive into the woods. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just so upset. And then before I got to the woods, I threw on the brakes, and I put the car in park, and I just began to cry. And I was thinking about who I was, the things that I'd done, and I knew that I was not right. And I had a gun that was in my back seat floorboard on the passenger side, so I could reach over and grab it. And I said, this life hasn't amounted to anything. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares for me. I'm such an awful, wicked person. And I grabbed that gun, and I pulled it up, and I put it in my lap, and I was going to put it under my chin and shoot myself in the head. Hello there, Chaplain Reese here. This video is for Brother Norm at Precious Testimonies, and I want to say thank you, Brother Norm, for giving me this opportunity to share my testimony with you and everyone else that may be watching. I have recently started my own YouTube page or channel, and it's Chaplain Reese, and I've got some devotionals that I'm working on. Starting that up. I'd appreciate if you would check that out. You can contact me there. You can find me on Facebook. And if I can do anything for you, please let me know. I hope you enjoy my testimony. God bless. Joining me with this testimony. When I was 15 years old, I was saved. I gave my heart and life to Jesus Christ at a Baptist youth camp in Lone Star, Texas. And I really felt like I was saved. I felt good about the commitment that I had made, but I just didn't stick with it. There was lots of events that took place in my life from the time I was 15 till the time that I was 18. My parents, they got a divorce when I was 16, 17 in that area. And I got to hanging around, spending lots of time with bad people and introduced to drugs, alcohol, parties, and just an awful life of sin. Now, with me saying that, I'm not blaming me not living for God on anybody. The Bible says to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. I didn't continue living for God, and it's nobody's fault but my own. But I went down that road, and then when I was 17, I joined the National Guard. I went into the National Guard and went basic training, finished my last year of high school, and then I went to advanced individual training, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. After I got out, I went to work at International Paper Lumber Mill, New Boston, and I was just working there and starting my life. I would work all week. I worked nights from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. Then over the weekends, I would go get beer and party. And again, I was introduced into using marijuana, smoking marijuana with my friends, and also methamphetamines. And I could tell that my life was going down the wrong path. I wasn't getting anywhere. So that's why I said, well, maybe if I joined the Army and got away from all this and got a new start and tried to do something different with my life, maybe that would help me. So that's what I done. Was I went to the people at my National Guard unit, and I said, I want to do regular Army. I want to be full-time. So they said okay, and they signed my papers to release me to regular Army. And I signed up with a recruiter there in Texarkana, Texas, and they sent me to Fort Carson, Colorado. Now, right before that, right before I left, I was wanting to change my ways because I knew that I was not living right. I knew I wasn't going the way that God had planned for me. So I started visiting church just a little bit before I went to Fort Carson, Colorado. And after I left, I said, well, I'm going to go to church. So I was there in the reception before I went to my actual unit there at Fort Carson as a 63 Bravo light wheel vehicle mechanic. And there was some guys that were coming around and introducing themselves and inviting people to church. So I said, well, I'm going to go to church because this is turning over my new leaf. I'm going to change things now. So I went to church a couple of times, and I just didn't like it. I didn't get nothing out of it. It was one of them humdrum churches, and it just wasn't anything that I could feel anything in. Which, living the way that I was actually living, you couldn't feel much. But so I said, well, I'm going to try a different church, and I looked in the phone book, and I found a church that was off post, and I went to it, and it just wasn't there either. I couldn't get nothing going on there, wasn't feeling nothing. So, unfortunately, I fell back in with the same type of crowd that I was in with before. I got sent to my unit, and in the barracks and with the people, I fell right in with the parties, the drinking, and then eventually the drug usage, marijuana, and also, to my shame, in the military, using methamphetamines. Events took place, and even they started doing drug tests, and I had been using marijuana every day, and also methamphetamines, and we took a drug test, and I knew I'd failed it, and it came back, and I had a couple of friends that I was using drugs with in the Army, and theirs came back that they failed, but they never said anything to me. I said, wow. Actually, let me back up. They gave us a drug test. Myself and two other friends that were in that unit had been using marijuana and methamphetamines. And they gave us a drug test, and I said, well, we failed it, so we might as well keep on doing what we're doing, use all the drugs we want to, so we continued doing it. Well, guess what? They were behind on their drug test, so they gave us another drug test. So I said, wow, we're really in trouble now. My two friends that were using drugs with me, both of them, their drug test came back positive, and they got Article 15s, they got discharged from the Army, but it never happened to me. I don't know how it took place, but I didn't get discharged. I stayed in, and from that point forward, I said, well, no more drugs for me in the Army. But I still had that desire to do them. And my unit, it was during the time of 9/11, my unit got sent over to Afghanistan, Iraq. The police company did. And I was a mechanic. Most of our vehicles stayed there. They needed somebody to maintain those vehicles while everybody else was gone. And I was one of the ones that stayed back. Well, they came back from Afghanistan, and they said, well, you're going this next time since you stayed back. So I said, okay, that's fine. I never did try to get out of it. That's what I signed up for. But before the next rotation was leaving, I got orders to go to South Korea. And when I went over to South Korea, I got into I was partaking in bad things, sinful things, just going deeper and deeper. Didn't do drugs, drank lots of alcohol, and went to the bars and partied, all that kind of thing. But South Korea is non-deployable. Well, the American soldiers are there to protect the Republic of Korea. But it got so bad over in Afghanistan, the war there, Iraqi freedom, it got so bad that they were going to deploy the Delta 5588, my company that I was in, my battalion. And as they were getting ready to deploy, well, guess what? I was getting out, ETSing, getting out. So they did not make me go to that. So I actually missed going over to war 3 times, and there were 2 drug tests that I should have failed and been dishonorably discharged out of the Army that just didn't happen. And after I got out of the Army, I still had that desire for partying and drugs. So after I got out, I got on unemployment, and I moved out into a bus that was back behind my mom's house, and no water, electricity, and I just basically moved out there, and I done drugs all the time and drank and partied, and that was my life. And in doing all that, there were lots and lots of more things that I won't mention that I partook in, that I was involved in, that were just squeezing my life. But after almost a year of drugs and alcohol and lying, stealing, fighting, all kinds of things that were just sinful, after almost a whole year, every day from the time I got up, from the time I went to sleep, just on some type of mind-altering drugs, whether it was methamphetamines, cocaine, marijuana, or alcohol. After a whole year of that, one night I was at a party, and I'd been doing drugs all day, drinking all day. I think I was taking pills, some type of pills that I had that day. And I was at that party, and some things happened, and I was asked to leave because I almost got in a fight with somebody who was putting the party on, and they asked me to leave, so I said fine. And something happened. I was driving an 87 Camaro, white Camaro, and I got in that car, and I was going down that old dirt road on a summer night in Texas. And as I was leaving, something happened to me. I'd been searching for something to fill that hole in my heart all these years, and I never could find it. And that night, as I was going over my life and thinking about the things that I'd done and what I was involved in at that time, I realized who I really was. I realized that I was the worst person that I knew. I was the most wicked person that I knew, because I knew what my heart looked like, and God knew what my heart looked like. And in that 87 Camaro that night on that dirt road in Texas, I felt the conviction, and I felt bad for who I was and what I'd done. Tears began to roll down my face. And then all of a sudden, something inside of me got mad, and I gripped that steering wheel, and I was coming up on a sharp curve, and I was so out of my mind that I punched the gas on the accelerator, and I was just going to run into the woods. I was just going to drive into the woods. I don't know what I was thinking. I was just so upset. And then before I got to the woods, I threw on the brakes, and I put the car in park, and I just began to cry. And I was thinking about who I was, the things that I'd done, and I knew that I was not right. And I had a gun that was in my back seat, floorboard on the passenger side so I could reach over and grab it. And I said, this life hasn't amounted to anything. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares for me. I'm such an awful, wicked person. And I grabbed that gun and I pulled it up and I put it in my lap, and I was going to put it under my chin and shoot myself in the head. I thought I was depressed. I thought about suicide many times before throughout the 3 years that I was in the Army and that year that I was out. When all of a sudden I remembered a story about a man named Jesus who died for my sins so that I didn't have to live the way that I was living. And at that moment, I said, before I end it all, I'm going to give Jesus a chance. I put the gun back. I went home. And I went to bed, got up the next day, and I remembered what I thought about the night before, that I was going to start serving God. But I knew that I couldn't serve God the way I was living. It wasn't pleasing to Him. But I'd done so many things, and I'd been living this way for so long, I didn't think that I could stop it. I had so many addictions and so many, I thought there was no way that I would be able to change. So I said, well, that's crazy talk. I said, and I went to the liquor store and I bought a case of, or a 12 pack of cheap beer. And I brought it home and I sat down and I said, I'm going to drink every bit of this cheap beer, smoke marijuana until I forget all about what happened last night and what I thought about doing in serving Jesus. And I for some reason I poured it in a glass. I might have been drinking it hot. I can't remember. I poured it in a glass and I took one drink. And that is the last drink of alcohol that I've ever taken since that night 14 years ago. I tried to drink it all away, but I did. And I took that and I said, I am going to try Jesus. And at that point, I just fought. There's no way I can do it. It's impossible. But at that point, I said, if I can do it for 3 days, if I can just stop it for 3 days, I can do it for the rest of my life. I got rid of the beer, got rid of the marijuana, and that Sunday morning I said, I'm going to church. And I got up that Sunday morning. I found the best clothes that I could. All I'd been wearing for the past year was flip-flops and cut-off BDU Army pants. No shirt. I didn't hardly have any clothes to wear to church, but I found the best thing that I could. And it'd been so long since I'd been to that church, I didn't even know where it was. I couldn't remember how to get there, but I finally found it. And as I was driving that 87 Camaro to church, I looked over and I seen that church, and I put my foot on the accelerator and I drove right past it. And I turned around and I said, this is foolish. I'm going back home. But when I went back through, I turned in and I went in and I sat through the service. I don't even know. I mean, when you're living in sin, and you know, when a preacher gets up and starts talking and you really don't know who Jesus is, you don't know who disciples are, you don't know what Old Testament or New Testament, when you sit in something like that, you don't have any idea. It's almost like they're speaking a different language. And that's what it was with me. I maybe because I wasn't saved at the time, I'd made a commitment to God, but I hadn't fully committed to Him. Maybe that's why I didn't understand. I don't know. but they were starting a revival. So I said, well, I'm giving God 3 days, so I'm going to go to this revival. And on the third night of that revival, after thinking about it and after God helping me to not do drugs and to not look at pornography and to not lie and to not not do all of those things that I'd been doing for the past year, for him to help me those 3 days, I said, well, it's time to make the real commitment. And I got down and I prayed. I repented of my sins. I told God that I was sorry. And I said, I accept the sacrifice of your son, Jesus Christ, as my Savior. And it's not about the prayer that I prayed. It's about the commitment that I made, that I repented and I committed myself to God. And God saved me. God filled me with the Holy Ghost about a month after that. He done a great work in my life. And now, 14 years later, I have a good godly wife. I have 4 children that I'm very proud of. I've had opportunities to be in the ministry, and I am currently in the ministry right now. Arkansas Hospice Chaplain. I've been with them 2 years. And the month after next will be 2 years. I pastored a church. I work at the homeless mission in Conway, Arkansas. I've preached at the nursing homes and rehab centers, and it's just I'm a member of a group of guys that goes to the Verizon Arena when they have great big concerts and pass out gospel tracts and just so many other things that God has allowed me to do by His grace. And I'm thankful for what God has done for me. He saved me. He worked a miracle in my life when right now, if I would have kept going the way I was going, I was getting ready to buy a large amount of marijuana and begin selling it in smaller amounts to make money. Right before I got saved, I was getting ready to do that. So I, right now, would probably be either in jail, prison, or dead and in hell. But God's grace, His amazing grace, reached down and touched me, and He delivered me, and that's my testimony. Has it been easy since then? No, I have had many difficult times since then. I've had many obstacles and disappointments, and things happen, and people have done things to me, and I've done things to people that I'm not proud of since then. It hasn't been perfect. I've messed up, but God has always been there for me. And I want to tell you that He is there for you too. God done it for me, and God can do it for you. Thank you for listening to my testimony. If there is anything that I can do to help you or be a blessing to you, please let me know, because I'd be glad to help you.